This is the first session of the second part in our Congress, and this session is going to be about investments. We are not investors, so let's listen to energy investors first. And let's give the floor to Erol Bey. I think we can allocate 5 minutes to each of our speakers, and we can repeat the round, of course. And I will be asking questions to you. That's how we can keep you awake in a dynamic way. I was going to deliver a presentation, but I gave up. I won't now. First, I'll listen to you, and maybe the audience will have questions too. Erol Demirel is Turkey's first energy investor. He is the first investor who made investments in wind. Please introduce yourself. I greet you with respect. In 1998, we installed our first wind power plant. We bumped into so many difficulties that it was really painful. This power plant started operating in 1998 for the first time, and we made our application in 1997. We were like a plane when we first applied, which was asking for the landing permit. No one knew how to deal with this application. They didn't know how to evaluate, they didn't know how to permit. For example, we were required to sign a 5-year-long fuel agreement, which had nothing to do with wind. We had to work for almost 2 weeks to convince the grid operators. In 2 weeks, we had managed to convince them 90%, saying that it would work in compliance with the grid. And the remaining 9% was also convinced during the opening ceremony, which was led by the minister at that time. And our plants are now operating without any problems for almost 20 years. But the permitting authorities had not yet determined what to control on our plants. But permits required to be obtained just increased. The list grew even further each year with each plant. So when the permit procedures are quite long, it almost becomes impossible for us to go back and amend some things. For example, once we obtain our 17th permit, they ask us so many amendments that even render, let's say, our 3rd permit invalid. So our expectation is to see some procedures with clarified standards and conditions. So the existing permission procedures take longer than normal investment procedures. That's why we think we have almost accomplished everything once we obtain the permit, even though we haven't installed a new turbine. The average price of wind is now on a competitive position. But we cannot predict everything with wind. what to produce and when to produce. We can't predict those issues. and we are required to provide hourly generation estimates 24 hours before. So when the direction of wind changes, therefore we sometimes happen to sell high amount of energy for cheaper prices and low amount of energy for higher prices. Now there is this center which observes and predicts the wind patterns. If the center focuses exactly on Turkey, I think wind energy industry can be managed more efficiently. And we are ready to financially support RITM, this center. So we have good technology, we have good wind opportunities. That's why we don't have serious complaints. All the energy authorities have been recently supporting us. They are really facilitating these kinds of processes. So we find the future quite promising, the wind future quite promising in Turkey. Mehmet Bey, can you also introduce yourself?
Söylenmemiş şeyleri söyleyerek gidersek ikinci turu daha hızlı yaparız. Buyurun. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Thank you very much, esteemed Chair. I'm Mehmet Acarla, the General Director of NBW Energy. Of course, we entered the energy market quite after our previous speaker. It may seem like an advantage because they have also experienced quite a lot of things. Thanks to other pioneering investors, all the problems related to the energy industry have been bumped into and resolved before us. But as everyone else, we also bumped into difficulties as beginners. It has various reasons. I believe there are 4 key players on the market. We as investors only comprise one part, and on the other part there is the public sector, and the rest is suppliers and financial authorities. Investing into this market is not something easy. You need to meticulously develop projects and you need to properly conduct them. I also think there are mistakes made by also us investors. We are complaining and criticizing about the existing circumstances, but we should also look at ourselves. Projects developed before the period of 2007, the issue of November the 1st applications, and transfer of licenses in the subsequent periods have led to a great interest in the industry, but also have led to the development of quite irregular projects, which lacked the necessary measures, which lacked predictions about productivity, but still these projects have been transferred to other parties. When Borusan embarked upon this market in 2007, we were able to buy licenses. We had been buying the licenses of the projects instead of developing them by ourselves. And when we looked at the projects, we decided that they had to be worked on from scratch, carrying out the measurements, trying to predict its productivity, and the wind turbines performance are quite difficult processes. And if you don't carry out meticulous studies on these issues, your investment cannot be turned into profits. This is how the outlook is from the perspective of investors, but beginners are lucky in that their peers have already made mistakes. Let's have a look at the issue from the perspective of the public sector. The most important issue for investors is the predictability. It's important to predict the situation and the patterns of the energy market, the upcoming regulations, the time that passes until a construction permit is given, and the time during which the generation starts. While deciding on an investment, if you can predict these issues, the decision-making process gets easier. Excluding the changes in the laws, there are a lot of amendments and changes in legislation, regulations, and each change ends up in at least 6-month delays. New authorities are distributed, and until these authorities get to know the TWECs of the industry, 6 months pass. Once the authority changes, at least an authority that gives permit changes in the regulation, it requires us to wait 6 months more. But we are seeing that all these problems are slowly being solved. EMRA definitely gives an ear to the investors and tries to bring solutions to various problems. But each change costs us at least 6 months, each of them, trust me. There are a lot of examples, but I'm not going to go into details. But one is the Forestry Ministry. We are sure these problems are going to be solved. I don't want to look like I'm complaining a lot. But I found out that in the UK, the legislation has changed 24 times. The liberalization of the energy markets and penetration of the private sector into these markets open up a learning process. Both investors and the public sector start to learn something. It's a mutual learning process. That's why I think we shouldn't be complaining a lot. But this is a demanding task. Under these circumstances, we should try not to intimidate the investors, and we should act as fast as possible. I also think that especially the Ministry of Energy is quite willing to help and to collaborate. I'd like to thank them for this reason. I hope we receive the same kind of support from other ministries. While our panelists were talking, I decided to ask 3 questions. In the morning, the president of EMRA told us that a license with a capacity of 7,000 megawatts has not yet been commissioned, has not started operation. Yes, we know that you are dealing with some issues relating to permits. I am wondering why there hasn't been any efforts while there is this license with a capacity of 7,000 megawatts. Another question is about wind tunnels. I've found out that they may be used within the cities, and its effects on environment may be more different, and I'm wondering your opinions on that. And my last question is about our young people here. They are all very excited and we see a lot of young new entrepreneurs here. So what kind of recommendations would you have for them?
Aklıma gelen üç husus bu. Bunları eğer konuşmalarınızda değinirseniz bunları da seviniriz. Şimdi Kenan Bey, siz de devam edelim. Buyurun. Tanıtırsanız kendinizi.
Teşekkür ediyorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm Kenan Haifavi. I'm the Vice General Manager responsible for renewable energy. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if you can mention the pros and cons of wind energy in terms of investments when you compare it against other renewables. I'd first like to share my recommendations with our young friends. We all know that Turkey has a huge wind potential and the market is developing very rapidly. This is a dynamic industry and it will maintain its dynamism for 2 decades. Let me first tell you that it's a right choice of industry if you're willing to play in this industry. Our target for Turkey is to 20,000 megawatts. Our aim is to generate 30% of our overall energy with renewable resources by 2023. The wind will have a share of 20,000 megawatts here. There was a tender carried out in 2007 and a capacity of 8,000 megawatts was allowed to be licensed.
Aşağı yukarı ilave 8.000 megawattlık bir kapasite lisanslanabilir konuma geldi. Bundan önce de 2007'den önce de aşağı yukarı 3500-4000 megawattlık bir kapasite zaten lisanslanmış.
Had already been licensed and it was dealing with permits. When we look at investments into wind, we see that there is at least a 6-year period from the start of the investment to the commissioning period. And 4 years of this period pass with applying, getting the permits and the licenses. So this is how we can explain the issue of 7,000 megawatts here, especially when we take into account this long period. The last tender was carried out in September 2011, and we have a long period in order to put them in practice. However, my impression is that the public sector is doing their best to help us. This is the impression that I get from this Congress. Shortening of this long period will help us facilitate putting into practice this 7,000 megawatts of capacity. And for investors, it's very important for us to determine the risks.
Yatırımcı olarak en önemli noktalardan biri herhangi bir yatırımcı olarak demek lazım esasında. Yani ne iş yaparsak yapalım, gideceğimiz yolda önümüzdeki engelleri, riskleri ne kadar tanımlayabiliyorsak, onları ne kadar
and to quantify them if we need to eliminate those risks. Each project has 4 levels, 4 phases, including permits, licensing, financing, equipment supply contracts, and the start of construction. Excluding licensing and permission periods, the investors are at the wheel. But the first 2 phases create the longest amount of time. As investors, the most important issue here is to determine the risks. Both the Ministry and EMRA are doing their best to lessen the amount of those risks that we are unable to determine. The new law is not a final version. As investors, we are also contribute to this law with our opinions. The concept is different for those working with foreign investors. In foreign countries, a project with a license means a project that can be implemented afterwards. It means that such a project can be financed. But thanks to the new law, the license procedures will have the same meaning as in foreign countries. The law allows us to present our projects, our licensed projects, as something that we can implement, that we can finance. Actually, I'm not fully informed about wind tunnels. I think I answered all these questions, and thank you very much. So you're also responsible for distribution, thermic, so you are active in almost all fields. That's why you may have more of a global outlook. I'm Serdar Nişli from Aksa Energy, acting as the Vice Chairman of the board. I've been actively involved in this industry for 30 years as Aksa Energy. Today we have 15 power plants. Our installed capacity is 2048 megawatts. We have thermic plants, we have power plants operating with gas, and we have wind power plants, as well as a brown coal plant which is under construction right now. In 1 year we expected to start operation with a capacity of 270 megawatts. 5 out of these 15 power plants are wind power plants. This has the highest amount of plants within our portfolio. We have 2 hydroelectricity power plants. Yes, we have licenses for hydroelectric power plants. We have commissioned almost 5 of our wind power plants. 3 of them are under construction. We have only 1 license remaining for which we need to carry out some measures. Our installed capacity is 183 megawatts. An additional 87 megawatts will be activated in the next 6 months. We are operating a capacity of 278 megawatts, which means we are operating 8 wind power plants. But the number is only 2 when it comes to hydroelectric power plants. But the construction takes longer. Once the permissions are given for wind power plants, the other phases take place rapidly. Our total generation is 10 billion kilowatt hours, and next year we will generate 500 million kilowatt per hours from wind. Our aim for next year is 750 million kilowatt per hours. Let me also share some of our experiences with you. For the last 15 years, we have been measuring the wind patterns, and we have gone through a lot of experiences in terms of investments and operations of wind power plants, together with turbine suppliers and all the other energy investors in Turkey. We even had to choose wind turbines with very limited sources. While selecting turbines, turbine manufacturers also had a lot of difficulties, and we were even unable to receive quotations in most of the cases, because these turbines were designed depending on Germany and the Netherlands on flat valleys and with regular wind patterns. That's why we had to start with limitations as well in terms of blades and in terms of lengths. But the penetration of Mediterranean countries into the wind industry urged turbine manufacturers to come up with more sophisticated technologies. I'm not fully informed of wind tunnels, but when we have a look at wind turbines, we see that they are quite different today. Blade diameters have increased and the generation capacity has increased. We also had a lot of difficulties on the field, including geographical conditions, circumstances relating to assemblies, and so on. Some difficulties were resolved thanks to the collaboration of the suppliers. During operation, we also had a lot of difficulties because turbines were not working under some temperatures, and now some developments were made relating to the tropical conditions. We also applied these developments to our turbines. There have been important changes in the braking systems, in the way the blades run, and new models have been finally released. So Class 2 and Class 3 turbines started to work very efficiently. Therefore, we worked on 4 of our 5 plants and modified some of our turbines. In 2 sites, we replaced our Class 1 turbines with Class 2 turbines. We only changed the power curve there. In one field, we didn't modify the tower at all, but we modified the blades. We upgraded our turbines to Class 2 and Class 3. This led to an improvement of 5 to 10% in terms of our generation capacity. In another site, we did something very challenging and we modified 11 turbines. We replaced our Class 1 turbine with the cutting-edge technologies. Per unit, we achieved 100% generation improvement, and the capacity usage percentage increased up to 35%. So this is one of the directions we need to adopt in Turkey. Now we have only 1 license left, the measure process of which is ongoing. Turbine suppliers have improved themselves too, and today they are able to give quotations for most of the parts, challenging parts in Turkey. They can manufacture turbines in compliance with these challenging sites. When it comes to wind investments, Changes in brand, changes in development and projects, changes in regulations are really challenging issues. But once you make the investment, everything works faster. I think there is a promising future for turbine investments in Turkey. We also aim to improve the productivity of the already installed sites. In Germany today, new plants are activated with a capacity of 3 or 4 times higher than ours in Turkey. Therefore, we need to carry out some studies to maximize our existing turbines' capacities and potential. Let's skip to the second round. Let's focus on the financing and HR side of wind industry in the second round. Would you like to share your experiences in this issue? And we will receive questions from our audience. In the past, we had no luck about investments because no one knew what a wind power plant was. But today, financing is not creating trouble, especially for investors who deeply and intensively work in this area with already installed power plants. We don't have a lot of specialized employees in wind industry, but we work to build their capacity. The Turkish youth is quite ambitious to learn. I think we are able to double or triple our staff members every year. Let me also talk about domestic contributions. We would benefit from domestic contributions in December 2011. However, there were miscalculations and we were told that our rights would be reduced for 1 year if we had started using this contribution. We didn't want to lose 1 year, that's why we didn't use these contributions in the first year. There was a condition that required us to not use any imported materials. We resolved the problem by convincing authorities during their visit to our factories, because it was impossible to avoid using imported materials, but still we had already lost 1 year. Third year, we were required to submit quality certificates. The problem there was that we only had turbine quality certificates. In the end, we solved this issue, but by this time it was already 2013. I hope we don't experience any last-minute surprises in 2014. Our expectation was to see an even distribution of power.
Bizim aslında beklentimiz güç oranının herhangi bir şekilde bunun orantılanmasıydı. Mesela en kötü örnek bir salgınımızda var. Vaktiyle lisans 800 kW'lık alındığı için lisansımız 800.8 kW'tı. Sonra seneler geçince türbinler büyüdüğü için 10 tane 2 MW'lık bir tane 800 kW'lık koymuştuk. Ve sırf 800 kW.
According to the new regulation, we are not eligible to receive subsidies due to some problems because one of our turbines has imported materials. Actually, the energy that this imported turbine component generates is really small compared to other turbines. So if we had deactivated that specific turbine, we would have been luckier, but we just didn't want to. But your loss is only affecting your profits, right? Yes. Yes, I mean, let's just record it this way. Still, we had to deal with some difficulties when it comes to replacements of foreign parts with domestic parts. I don't think this was an effective process for Turkey especially. Our expectation was to still receive some subsidy depending on the proportions of domestic and foreign components. This was a little bit disappointing for us. Director General for Renewable Energies is here, Yusuf Bey. He is in this hall right now, and we will give the floor to you so that you can answer this issue. This is like throwing the baby with the bathwater. However, we're happy to be using domestic contributions. I'd like to answer some of your questions. One was about wind turbines. Technology is improving rapidly, including turbines and towers. Productivity is increasing, and we are able to work with low levels of wind as well. And we are also able to catch the wind in fields which do not receive a lot of wind. The range of alternatives is also expanding in terms of wind energy. One technology can be used in the cities, within the cities, for example, vehicles that can be installed on skyscrapers. Investors should closely follow up these kinds of innovations. And we also should look into the track record of these kinds of technologies. But Turkey shouldn't provide a platform to be used as a trial and error environment. I still believe that investors will be benefiting from these kinds of new technologies. Let me also answer your question about this 7,000 megawatts. You might be wondering what's happening with this 7,000 megawatts. Why is it not being operated? For this we need to focus on the November, the first period. I guess that the projects with a capacity of 11,000 megawatts can only realize a 60% potential. Of this 7,000 megawatts, some projects are still going through the application procedures, and I believe some of the projects won't be put in practice at all, unfortunately. Some of these projects were probably developed for the purposes of selling it. They lack productivity and measurements. We also go through some delays during permissions. Pre-construction period, which we predict in the beginning, sometimes get to be lengthened. Of course, we also make some mistakes, but the real issue is the unpredictable changes in the regulation, together with the unpredictable delays. But I'm sure other projects will definitely be put in practice. But my estimation is that only 6,500 megawatts out of these 11,000 megawatts will be put in practice. This is a challenge in front of us during our way to 2023 targets. We need to consider some dead projects as if they will never be put in practice, so that we can plan our efforts properly. TEIA should also take this into consideration while announcing its capacity opinions. Turkey is rich in human resources. We have skilled people. That's why we're not having difficulties in terms of human resources. However, only 3 of our universities are giving a place to wind. I think our universities should give a place to wind, especially in terms of research and development. We have some programs to win some people as technicians from the vocational schools of the area that we are installing. As we need electricity technicians, machinery technicians. Technicians comprise an important part in our productivity. We need qualified, skilled staff. That's why we should also take on some responsibility. And in the upcoming periods, we will have a lot of wind power plants spread across Turkey. That's why we will need even more people. However, we're ready to work on that specific issue. Financing wind projects is not a problem.
Finansman tarafı, rüzgar projelerinin finansmanı aslında bir sorun değil.
We see today that some banks are intimidated by the idea of hydroelectric power plants, but this is not the case for wind. It's easier to receive financing from banks in Turkey. It's critical to have properly planned projects. That's why banks require security. So if you can prove that your project is productive enough, if your project is planned properly, the security that you need to submit gets smaller. You need to focus on that if you want to eliminate your risks and reduce the amount of financial burden. That's why I don't think this will create a problem either. Let me also talk about the position of wind energy against renewable energies. First of all, I'd like to wish good luck to those operating or trying to operate hydroelectric power plants. In order to work with wind, the investment amount should be high. However, development doesn't cost a lot. Therefore, only competent investors should embark upon this industry. This is why not the entire 7,000 megawatts of energy will be able to put in practice. But the easiest one will probably be solar energy. It is always fast and easy to develop. Thank you very much. Let's continue with Kenan Bey.
Finansman sorular aklıma geldi ama burada sormayacağım. Tur tamamlansın ondan sonra. Evet, buyurun.
Finansman konusuyla ilgili ülkemizde zaten
Hydroelectricity and wind power can be easily converted into investment opportunities. The construction of hydroelectric power plants requires 75 to 80% of financial and construction related costs, whereas this figure is only 10% for wind power plants.
olabileceği kısımla alakalı. Dolayısıyla finansman açısından da bunu bağlayacak olursak finansörler için en önemli şey
For
sistemi ortadan kaldırmak.
financial supporters, the most critical issue is properly planned projects. So once a wind power plant is planned properly, and when the uncertainties are removed, it's easier for us to receive financial backup. And after all these procedures, it's easy for investors too to install, to assemble the entire wind power plant. It's almost like playing with Legos.
Sonuçta ve çok kısa sürede bunu hayata geçirebiliyoruz. Örnekleri malumunuz hepiniz.
This is not the case with hydroelectric plants, but it's more difficult to finance hydroelectric power plants because they also come up with uncertainties even throughout the construction period.
Onun dışında finansmanla ilgili
We are trying to achieve a certain level of momentum. In general, the projects are financed by domestic supporters. But it's not only about the construction, equipment also matters here. So financial providers are encouraged to facilitate this process. Some projects involve equipment as a 80%, especially when the equipment arrives in the construction field. It means that more than 50% of a project is completed.
daha rahat finanse edilebilir kriterlerin olması hepimiz için avantaj olacaktır diye düşünüyorum. İnsan kaynakları açısından evet ülkemiz çok
I agree that Turkey is very rich in human resources. Our young fellows graduate with highly skilled qualifications, but I also observe some impatience. Wind powers require so much effort and it's a long-term effort. So those who are expecting a rapid change from yesterday to today will probably be disappointed. However, if we achieve to facilitate this process relating to the permits and applications, they might convince themselves to be patient and at least stand in the industry for a while. In the past, human resources was a problem that we mostly encountered. We had to bring in foreign human resources in the cases of small maintenance or repair jobs. it's very important that now we are employing Turkish staff. We established some teams, maintenance and repair teams, and we allocated for these teams some foreign specialists so that they could be trained. Technology is new, the work itself poses some risks. Turkey has potential, however, I can't say that we properly managed the problem. We were somehow ignored when it comes to financing, subsidies. Wind tunnels are covered by the subsidies, but wind turbines aren't. We are making huge investments all over Turkey, but we don't have subsidies. But the ministry has added some issues in the law for renewable energies, according to which contribution percentages are now applicable to domestic projects. But we are carrying out activities on the free market, so are we supposed to import as well?
Burada da bir atlama oldu diye düşünüyorum. Yani bu GEK kanununa faydalanmayan yatırımcıların yerli.
But I think investors can be encouraged to use domestic turbines and blades as well as towers.
Onların da bunlardan faydalanarak yerli kule, kanat, kabin kullanmaları teşvik edilebilir.
In the past we had investment discounts. I believe investment discounts should be in place because some project companies are required to pay corporate tax even before they manage to pay their debts.
Siz yine hatırlarsanız bizim evvelden teşvik belgelerinde ithal listede olan bir aksamı, bir parçayı yerli aldığınız zaman birçok teşvikten faydalanırdınız. Bunların teşvik...
As you might as well remember, in the past you would benefit from a lot of subsidies when you bought products domestically. I think the current subsidy law should also provide the same. In general, we benefit from exporter subsidies. That's why opportunities for funding becomes more limited. If we are subsidized, supported as much as our peers abroad are, domestic components, domestic service and domestic maintenance are also supported.
Peki, sorularınızı soruyoruz bilmiyorum ama ben iki soru soracağım ama
Now I would like to hear your questions. Let me first ask my questions. First of all, what are the problems that you encounter in terms of environment? I mean the investment environment.
oradaki insanlar vesaire onlarla ilgili sorunlar. İkincisi de 20
And I would like to hear your opinions about what to do or what can be done in order to reach a goal of 20,000 megawatts or 40,000 megawatts.
dinleyicilerden soruları aldıktan sonra bu konularla ilgili de eğer fikirleriniz olursa dinlemekten büyük bir memnuniyet duyacağız.
Please don't forget that I'm here as a student. Where shall we start?
Evet, soruları nasıl alıyoruz? Yazılı olarak mı alıyoruz yoksa şifai? Peki.
Maybe we should start with our youngest friends here.
Şansınızı kaybettiniz. Evet, kırmızılı montlu bir arkadaş. Kendinizi de tanıtırsanız.
My name is Barush. I'm an MA student abroad studying on sustainable energies. Erol Bey, you mentioned that you bring up people, your own staff, in a student-teacher environment. How can we encourage our universities in Turkey to study or to research this field of energy? How can we convince them to collaborate with us?
Lisans programı veya yüksek lisans programı şu zamana kadar niye açılmadı? Ya da başka bir deyişle üniversitelerimizi rüzgar enerjisi konusunda çalışmaya, araştırma yapmaya nasıl teşvik edebiliriz? Veya sanayiyle üniversitelere ortak projelerde çalışmaya nasıl ikna edebiliriz? Bu tarz sorularıma cevap verebilirsiniz. Memnun olurum. Teşekkür ederim.
Peki devam edelim. Başka?
Let's hear a few questions first, before the answers.
Evet. Siz buyurun. Mikrofon nerede? Orada var mı soru? Yok yok. Herkes duysun. Var mı orada soru? Buyurun siz, ondan sonra sizin sorunuzu alalım.
Efendim ben Şırnak Üniversitesi'nde
I'm coming from Shirnak University. I'm studying at the Department of Energy Systems. I'd like to be informed more in detail about these projects and their costs. How can you support us when we come up with projects which sometimes may cost higher than wind energy projects?
Şimdi bu arada burada olan arkadaşlar için şöyle bir şey söyleyeyim.
Let me first say something to you all. As TWEC and as the chair of the organizing committee, we helped bring students from Shirnak University to here. We brought here 42 students. I'm so glad that they didn't turn down our invitation. And probably Mr. Demirel supported us and sponsored us to this end. Let me first thank them. Can we hear your question?
Bir mikrofon verebilir misiniz buraya?
benim sorum Demirel Bey'e olacak. Şimdi genelde
I live in a building block and the residents there are mostly retired people or actively working people. My aim is to install a wind turbine there, and I'd like to do that collecting money from the neighbors. How can we overcome financial obstacles in order to install such a turbine? Subsidies are limited, as you already mentioned. Subsidies are only applicable to companies which manufacture everything domestically. We are going to discuss this subsidy issue. Let's first wait until we start discussing this.
Yerlilik oranı hususunda konuşacak. O zaman gelince ama arkadaşlarımızın da tabii bu konuda söyleyecekleri varsa zevkle dinleriz. Peki sorulara kısaca, hızlıca cevap verirsek bir tur daha yapma imkanı olabilir. Ama bayanlardan...
We are going to hear the questions of our ladies here.
Evet Erol Bey, sizden başlayalım mı? Sorulara durumdan vazife çıkartarak hem bizim sorularımız hem dinleyicilerimizin sorularına istediğinize cevap verirseniz seviniriz.
Memnuniyetle. Hani arkadaşımız sordu, üniversiteye bir kırgınlığınız var mı?
We are working hand in hand with universities as much as possible. We weren't born like wind energy engineers. We are still specializing on the issue. It's a completely new field, that's why it's very difficult to find totally specialized people. But we are still employing those who have a familiarity with the field. Let me answer your question. If your project is really feasible, you are able to receive some loans or credits from banks. And if you can't receive any loans, it means that there is something wrong with your project. But if you're going to install something in your area, you need a consulting company. And if you work with domestic manufacturers, you can also benefit from the contribution percentages. This is how you can also submit a more feasible project to the credit authorities. We are rapidly moving on our path to 2023 targets, but when I look at our speed and the figure, that goal, I don't think 20,000 will be possible. I believe only 10,000 megawatts can be possible. That's why we need conditions that increase our speed. We are still losing 1 or 2 years due to permit procedures, and the better the price is, the more ambitious the investor is. Contribution fees are big supporters. Achievements of the goals depends very much on the economic outlook. The most important thing here is to be as fast as possible, but in a way to not overburden Turkey. We are working with universities. I don't think our company is the only one. For example, at Middle East Technical University, there are people who are directly involved in wind energy. And we work together in terms of energy analysis. We also have forward partners. That's why we are always required to have confirmations from independent authorities. We are in a continuous relationship with universities like Yıldız Technical University and Istanbul Technical University. We sometimes, from time to time, may even develop projects together. But we should also focus on technicians and operators. We always get to talk about universities. Let me talk about our relationship both with the natural environment and the social environment in places where we install power plants. Regardless of its type, energy investments always have an effect on the environment. It is even the case when you build a home on a field. Each construction project is an activity that has an impact on the natural environment. It also has an impact on the social environment if it's a power plant. The most critical step here is to inform the social environment of the project about what you're going to do there and how you're going to affect life there. All these elements should be openly discussed. Otherwise, villagers there in their daily course of life suffer from the changes, especially during the construction period. You always encounter with a negative reaction unless you share what you're going to do there and what kind of phases they will need to go through and how you need to eliminate the effects and risks. In this regard, investors should take on a significant role. We always tend to criticize people, but we have made so many mistakes, so we shouldn't forget this. We should also avoid people who are trying to take advantage of our projects. There is a specialized unit focused on energy under the Department of Electrical Engineering at Middle East Technical University, and also the Department of Economy is carrying out studies about the pricing and modeling of energy. Universities don't have the luxury to be unfamiliar with such an industry which is rapidly growing. They are supposed to pioneer the industry, that's why they have created some special units. And they have a tendency to bring up quite qualified students at the BA and MA level. I also agree with the fact that we can only achieve a capacity of 10,000 megawatts if the conditions are sustained by 2023. We are all focused on the same target as the ministry, the investors and other stakeholders, so we will try our best to increase our potential. In terms of environmental problems, I think we need to look at the investor profile. Investments in the energy industry have actually been led by contractors who decided to focus on that area. The most important thing about investment is proper planning. The time you spend by planning the project also matters. This is how you can minimize the effect that you have on the environment. We shouldn't also underestimate the social environment, but I think in case of wind energy plants, we offset ourselves, because in order to carry the turbines, we construct roads there. We improve the infrastructure in the area. This way we also contribute to the protection of forests. Because when there are roads within the forest, it's easier to fight against possible forest fires. And I believe that each power plant creates somehow a positive image for the area. BA and MA programs in energy are now offered to students at universities. However, the critical issue is technical vocational high schools. It would be great to see vocational high schools opening up not only energy but also wind energy classes. During our activities at the site, our first aim is to provide employment to the area's residents, but this is not always sufficient. We also agree with the fact that we can only achieve a 10,000 megawatts capacity instead of 20,000 unless necessary subsidies are given and unless necessary facilitations are made in terms of permit procedures. This is how we can increase this 10,000 megawatts capacity up to 20,000. We can still receive some questions. There is a lady there. I see a few people eager to ask questions.
Merhabalar, ben
I represent South Marmara Development Agency here. I agree with you about the importance of technical staff. I hope subsidizing and encouraging vocational schools is also taking a place in your agenda in terms of bringing up people who are specialized in wind or in energy in general. We granted some funds to 2 vocational schools so that they could teach their students, provide technical assistance. I also sadly tend to think that if we cannot bring up necessary amount of people, and if we cannot totally focus on domestic production, as well as if we fail to provide maintenance and repair services locally, we might see the funding being shifted from our country to foreign countries. This is the first time I'm in a congress which is completely dedicated to wind. It seems that it's mostly the ministry which receives criticisms, and those going through difficulties and problems are the leading companies in Turkey. Turkey has progressed a lot in the field of energy, that's true. Education and training are essential. I cannot also imagine that our ministers are only sitting at their desks and not necessarily visiting any sites. If such leading companies are going through problems, I can't imagine how small and medium-scale companies can raise their voices. I've come back to Turkey recently. Normally I used to live abroad, and I've been to Ankara 47 times since I came back, and nobody necessarily heard my voice. Please show me a way to do something. This is not a criticism, but once you are in the territory of the ministry, you'll always bounce back from one door to the other. We have an amazing project, but just because we are small, nobody hears us. That's disappointing. Just note down my email. I hope I see you next week if you visit Ankara for the 48th time. I'm an energy consultant. Everyone had a word to say about permissions relating to investments. However, no one tended to voice the real problem. I believe that we are treating the Ministry of Forestry a bit unfairly. But the real problem is the pending letters at the Prime Ministry, which were written by the General Directorate for Forestry. They penned at the Prime Ministry for 6 to 9 months. The second problem is that you don't get any information when you consult somewhere. You don't know if your project is approved, you don't know if consultants have put their signatures on it. So the main issue is the permit to be issued by the Prime Ministry, not the one to be issued by the Ministry of Forestry. And the Prime Minister has released a communique and facilitated the process for the licensed projects, but not for the unlicensed project. And let's not get carried away by our dreams. Unless this process at the Prime Ministry is further facilitated, it's even not possible to exceed 10,000 megawatts. Therefore, I'm wondering what you can do as the ministry. what can associations do? We have a general directorate for renewable energies, but it doesn't even have a definition in the regulation. Only in some part of the regulation it is referred to as the related directorate of the ministry. However, the General Directorate for Renewable Energies should really be referred to in these kinds of instruments. And the real authority for these kinds of permits are not the Ministry of Forestry, but the General Directorate for Renewable Energy. Let's have 2 more questions and then we'll start answering the questions. I'm representing the development agency for Southern Black Sea region. I'm working as a specialist for planning and programming energy. The wind energy potential is high in our region. And we are curious to hear your opinions about how we can introduce and promote this potential in our region and what we can offer to our investors. And I would like to hear just one experience that you had, both in terms of time period and permit procedures.
Peki, teşekkür ederiz. Önde bir arkadaşımız var. Mikrofonu uzatırsanız artık son soru olsun.
İyi günler. Pardon, bu bir soru değil, bu bir öneridir. Benim yapmak istediğim özmerklerden yurt dışına geliyorum.
This is not a question but an opinion. I think it would be a great idea to install fire detection systems while you are installing turbines within forestry areas, as well as constructing roads. A slight amendment in the regulation would really bring a lot of chances to save our forests.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Şimdi isterseniz kifayet müzakere yapalım. Sizin söylemek istediğiniz bir şey varsa...
Let's start with Yusuf Bey and then I will conclude.
Yusuf Bey dinleyelim. Bu arada tabii hem insan kaynakları...
Human resources and funding opportunities will be discussed in further detail in different sessions.
Mikrofon yok mu? Buyurun Yusuf Bey. Çok kısa olsun da 2 dakika, 3 dakika içinde lütfen.
Let me explain something very short about training. The need for qualified and certified people is increasing, and we are in some partnerships to provide training in different lengths so that we can create specialized human resources both in solar and wind power. This training project will start in the first period of 2014. TWEC might also be involved when it comes to wind, when it comes to providing wind training. We are still negotiating. This is how we can contribute to the industry by meeting the specialized personnel needs. Domestic contribution regulation has always been a controversial issue. However, we've been always close collaboration with the industry itself, and we were always willing to amend and improve it. In the beginning, there was this phrase which required 100% domestic products, Firstly, we amended that part. Then there were problems in the submission of some certificates. But these issues weren't raised during our negotiations and discussions with the private sector representatives. But amendment process took some time. We could only bring into force these amendments from 2014. This was a bit disappointing for us too, because our ministry wanted to see this regulation in force as soon as possible. However, we believe that as of 2014, the regulation will have full coverage. Fortunately, not everything we design in our minds can be reflected on paper. For example, we also noticed that some plants are unable to benefit from domestic contribution due to some restrictions in the law. But we are also working on improving the law itself. Firstly, we all create a model for a mechanism to function, but it may not always be perfect. Also, this mechanism should be implementable, traceable, and measurable. It is agreed with the transmission company that there should be a standardized structure for the plants. So we cannot evaluate each turbine differently. Each turbine should be treated with the same domestic related conditions. It is also disappointing for us to see a plant operator or owner who is unable to benefit from subsidies. The Republic of Turkey has preferred to subsidize energy investments on a tariff basis. This is a preference. So subsidies are applicable both over the tariff and over the investment. This is like a person trying to travel on a train, both benefiting from a student discount, from a return ticket discount, and an elderly discount if possible. Let me also remind you of the fact that the figure 20,000 megawatts has a symbolic meaning. The goal should be even higher, 40,000 or 50,000. But I think the progress is in line with these goals. Some of you also mentioned that the General Directorate for Renewable Energy wasn't referred to in the regulation. There are some improvements about this, but I don't want to explain it further, especially here. I would first prefer to share them with our authorities and speakers here. Thank you very much. I have really enjoyed a lot in this session and I've learned a lot. Of course, as the ministry, we need to take on some responsibilities. There are a lot of people who gathered here, and we listened to some specialists, but we should ask, so what? Let me answer this question. First of all, perhaps we can carry out a mutual study together with TWEC so that we can see how the industry reflects these domestic products. This should be our first task. We should follow up the developments about the proportion of domestic products at the site and find out who were able to benefit from this domestic contribution and who weren't. Let me give this task, and I think we should complete this task by the end of March. This is how we can lead some improvements. I implied something in my speech in the morning. The permission procedures are our problem. In the last 15 days, we probably had 5 meetings at the Ministry of Energy, also attended by the Undersecretary of Prime Ministry. So the permission issue is on our agenda. This is not a mathematical equation, because this process also contains social aspects. However, I believe that in our next gathering we won't be talking about the same problems. As the public sector, we need to focus on the human resources who could contribute to the renewable energy. In technical aspects, we even may need to follow a more aggressive policy here. Therefore, we may even need to intensify these projects and studies which are focused on renewables. A roadmap should be imminent. This roadmap should also be implementable. This is how we can achieve our goal. Universities bring with it another controversy. I was a lecturer both abroad and at a prominent university of Turkey. I worked at Bilkent University for more than 10 years. And if you ask me, I would actually cancel most of the departments and only offer basic sciences, including philosophy and maths. But this is just a dream. Especially MA levels should be necessarily focused on special fields. However, it's impossible in Turkey. We are intensifying our efforts towards R&D activities led by universities. I agree with our General Director for Renewable Energy when it comes to subsidies.
Ben her zaman
But I always believe that we should be a little bit more doubtful and careful. Yes, our investors love low-cost investments.
yapmayı severler. Bu da onların en doğal hakkı. Fakat
Subsidies require a long-term effort, I should say, especially in coordination with TWEC.
söylediğim şey yaptığımız için söylüyorum. Biraz uzun vadeli bir çalışma içine girmemiz gerekebilir. Yani
Let's just note it down at least.
koymamız lazım. Bakanlığımızın tercihi
Our ministry has preferred to distribute subsidies based on tariffs,
yerlilik oranını arttıracak.
and the aim is to increase the proportion of domestic products.
Serdar Bey zannediyorum söylemişti. Serdar Bey'in söylediği şeyde kafamızın bir köşesinde
But Sardar Bey's recommendations may be taken into consideration. We should ask why and why not. My first impression is not quite positive. However, we are willing to focus on that. And our General Director for Renewable Energy answered very diplomatically the question of reference in the regulation. It looks like we also have some issues to focus on, but we noted it down.
bunu da biz kendi bakanlık olarak ödevimiz olarak not etmiş olduk. Onun dışında atladığım
I hope I didn't miss anything.
20.000 hedefi
Let me highlight the goal of 20,000 kilowatts. An expert's opinion would reveal that it's impossible to reach that figure.
enteresan bir şey gördüm. Kendim de yaşıyorum. Son anda böyle artık işler iyice
But Turkish people are mostly last-minute people
ülkeler olmayacak şeyleri bizim milletimiz, Türk milleti
who get to act very fast at the last minute.
bunun olmayacağına yönelik eleştirilerin hem TİAŞ'ı hem bizim enerjistleri
I also think that the criticisms about the impossibility of our goal would also encourage our ministry and other authorities, as well as the electricity transmission company. These alarm bells would urge us to act more proactively. And I'm sure that we will achieve an installed capacity of 20,000 megawatts by 2023. I don't know how, but we will make it. But I learned a lesson from this Congress. If policy makers and decision makers don't act carefully, this goal can be a dream. Therefore, our task is to create infrastructures to allow us to achieve this goal. Thank you very much for your attendance.